seem to understand. I'm not locked in here with you.
Great job, Ward. Enemies behind us.
You're locked in here with me!
I need healing now.
Thank you, my friend.
Anyone remember back in the innocent year of 2015 when Blizzard hadn't yet entirely ruined its reputation and everyone was whimsically excited for their new hit release Overwatch? That whole thing was very interesting when you look back on it. The sheer presence in people's minds that game had made everything that came out around that time to be heavily compared to Overwatch. Lawbreakers. Yeah, seems neat, but Overwatch. Battleborn? Man, look at this not Overwatch thing trying to be like Overwatch. Paladins? Literally just Chinese bootleg Overwatch. What is this? Team Fortress 2? I can't believe Valve invented a time machine just to copy Overwatch. Now, with the dust settled on all that, and the image of both Blizzard and Overwatch has died down significantly, I found it interesting to think about all the games that were actually coming out around that time, just to see how much of that was being blinded by the next big thing. So, let's see here. Lawbreakers? Oh. What about Battleborn? Huh. Yeah, while the situation for these games are more nuanced than just Overwatch killed it, Overwatch absolutely did not help these games. Out of all the shooters to come out around that time, it's most interesting that Paladins stood the test of time because on launch, it was the most outwardly similar game to Overwatch, especially with the character lineup it had. It was so easy to compare it to other characters in Overwatch that it only added more fuel to the Overwatch clone anti-hype train. But Paladins is actually quite different in this execution. The biggest divider between the games is that Paladin, for better or worse, prefers quantity over quality. Everything about Paladins is just more and faster. There's way more heroes than Overwatch ever had, because while Overwatch overall had some very fluid and well thought out kits that generally synergized extremely well with itself and the intended role of the class, Paladins kinda just says fuck it, and most classes actually have a very similar structure to their abilities. Then there's the game modes themselves, which are a test of how cracked out you can make a hero shooter. You have fairly basic game modes all things considered: Team Deathmatch, Payload called Siege in this game, and King of the Hill called Onslaught. But the major difference is how they handle the pacing of these modes and the maps themselves. Maps are very small. You could probably walk across the whole thing on your horse in less than a minute on even the longest of maps. And yes, horse. Every time you respawn, you're on a horse, which drastically improves your move speed. This allows you to get back into the fray extremely quickly without constantly moving the spawn points as you get pushed back. And also allows flankers to really disrupt people, since any damage or effect that gets applied to them cancels the horse, making it significantly slower to get back into battle. The speed at which you cap and the time you have to push is also very short. On Siege, you gain 1% capture progress per player per second. If you manage to park the whole team, it'll take at most 20 seconds to cap, and if you have only one person on the point, the longest it'll take is just over a minute and a half. Of course, people will contest hard, but the speed at which the combat happens means that it doesn't last as long as it does in other games. The twist with Siege is that both teams have to capture the point. Whoever captures it first gets 1 point of the 4 needed to win, and now has to push the cart. You get roughly 2 minutes to do this, with overtime that scales down pretty quickly. If you push it to the end, you get another point. If the enemy defends, they get 1 point, but they can't win by defending, so if you keep winning the first point and they keep defending, it'll eventually come down to whoever can cap the last point first. This way, there's no back and forth with playing 2 whole games on 1 attack and 1 defense. Everyone is simultaneously attacking and defending, which is a dynamic I really like. The longest I've ever had matches go on is about 16 to 17 minutes, with a few rare outliers being 20. Average matches tend to be closer to 12 minutes. And that's just for Siege, the longest game mode. Onslaught is even faster, and Team Deathmatch is by far the quickest because you only have to get 40 kills, and respawns are significantly faster. It's almost like loading into an instant respawn TF2 server. And there's really no holding out at choke points for 5 to 10 minutes waiting for something to happen for you guys to just steamroll through. Matches feel mostly consistent. The entire map is kind of one large choke point with how narrow they are, so the fights are always intense as opposed to, hey cool, we cleared this choke point, now we just cruise on to the next one. But at the same time, because you're so hard pressed to keep attacking and return to the fight so fast, you'll pretty much encounter everything at once, and it's very easy to snowball. When it comes to the champions, they definitely work to give you as many choices as possible, even if the choices aren't as insanely fleshed out as they are in other games. In Paladins, you have 4 character archetypes, with the tank, who's known as the front line of this game, a direct damage dealer, who generally functions best at mid-range, a flank who excels at close-range damage, and a healer who's a giant pain in the ass to deal with. The vast majority of classes within each archetype generally have a very similar structure to their abilities, and said kits aren't exactly very intricate or have a ton of synergy past the general use of that one ability. For the most part, that is. I'll give the devs all the credit. Every now and then they will release a much more complex character, and lately almost all of them have been much higher quality. Every champion, with very few exceptions, has one mobility or escape tool. One of their abilities is what the class's role is for. For healers, it's a heal. For tanks, it's some kind of barrier. And for flanks and direct damage, it's usually some kind of burst damage. Then you have an ability that's a bit more of a wild card. For DPS, it's usually something else to help you do more damage. For flanks, it tends to be a second mobility or defense tool. And for healers, it's usually some kind of crowd control. This is, of course, before the ultimate abilities, which is their own individual can of worms and vary pretty heavily. While that structure is usually true with few exceptions, that doesn't mean any class is particularly bland by any means. They play fast and loose with the idea of what to fill those gaps with. Mobility of one healer can involve you swapping places with your healing decoys, while another, it's just a move speed boost that reduces the maximum damage you can take up to a set amount. One direct DPS can have a boring old sprint, while another basically has a rocket jump. And there can be overlap with them, admittedly, but there's usually some major difference that changes how you approach it. There's actually 3 characters with grappling hooks. One is a healer who uses it purely as a high-powered escape tool that has pretty good verticality. The other 2 are flanks. One also comes with a feature to pull lighter enemies towards you, and the other allows you to cling to a wall which cloaks you for a few seconds. In general, there's very few characters I really dislike playing. Some of my favorites include Ray, a healer who has a very interesting mechanic to link to an ally or an enemy for different effects. Your abilities also work off the ally or enemy you're linked to, on top of being encouraged to constantly lay down fire at range to reduce your cooldowns. She ends up being an incredibly active playstyle where you're quickly making decisions that can single-handedly save or enable a push with the sheer power of your abilities. Alternatively, from a tank perspective, I love Inara. Her walls are just so evil to abuse. Blocking people off points, trapping people for your team to demolish, blocking ults. She's also ludicrously tanky because she can stack so many damage reduction and increased healing bonuses.
You can't knock it down. You know that you found the wall, the wall, the wall. No man on earth can make it fall.
I also gotta commend the animation and sound design for the champions. It's something that's expected to be good, but considering they have 55 champions currently, it's still impressive how they managed to make almost every single one distinct. Even when I forget the team composition, I know exactly who they are based off the sounds of their primary weapon or some ability they have. It also makes them pretty satisfying to play as well. Not all of them are hits, admittedly. I will give this game marks for having some pretty disappointing miniguns. It works fine for Ruckus, even if it still doesn't sound great, but I'm just sad that Rom's massive Hellfire Gatling sounds so lame despite how cool it looks. I mean, come on! The shell ejection port is a skull vomiting fire and shells! That's fucking rad! I'll also give a special shout out to how good Io's sounds are.
Take our light.
There is a reason almost 10% of all Paladins fan art is about her, despite being relatively new. It's the sound design. And then there's also the reloads. Holy fuck, they get so creative with their character designs, and these animations reflect it. There are some pretty basic ones, like simple weapon gestures or cooling off your weapons, since almost everything functions off magic crystals as a source of the ammunition. But then you have shit like Furia, who has a guardsman's wet dream, with a shotgun that's more bayonet than gun. She reloads it by scraping her hand across the blade to replenish the magic runes on it. And then you have someone like Ray who has no weapon. They just do funky hand movements to launch spells. skills. So what's their reload? They have 3 different hand stretching animations. That is so incredibly endearing. Future me here, I just learned while editing this that there's actually weapon inspection animations, and some characters have some really interesting details, like for example, Rey has a special inspection for her spirit link, and Corvus... It's pretty great. But back to the characters themselves, the level of variety actually goes even deeper than the sheer amount of the characters this game has to offer, because the game actually has some pretty unique ideas for a hero shooter, and that being the character builds. To some extent, you can influence how you want to play a specific champion. This is done with talents. Each champion has 3, and they heavily modify an ability or passive you have, and these get pretty extreme. One character, Barrick, has an ultimate where he throws down a high damage flamethrower turret inside of a big dome shield to dissuade anyone from entering. However, you can get a talent that lets you deploy the ult at 40% charge instead, and it uses a weaker version of the turret without the shield. This allows you to just flood various corners with high damage turrets to ruin the day of anyone who tries to get behind your shield. The other way you can influence your build is with decks. This is a system where you have 5 card slots and a total of 15 points to distribute into leveling up each card. You must have all 5 card slots filled, and all 15 points must be used for your deck to be valid. These offer you a way of providing self-sustain, more health, or various buffs to your abilities. Going back to Barrick, you can use certain cards to take the flamethrower turrets to the extreme. There's a card that lets you heal your sentries while standing next to them, and another card lets them heal you while you're near them. This allows Barrick to sustain himself while his barrier is up, and also heal his flamethrower sentries so that they have significantly longer uptime considering their cost. Admittedly, you'll likely find one all-aroundish deck and rarely swap out of that because either one setup works so well, or the other cards are just trash. But for some heroes, you can end up with multiple decks depending on which talents that they have available. This really helps squeeze all the more variety out of each character as you think about what build would counter what team comp best. This is also because you cannot swap characters or loadouts once the match has started. Now that might sound bad considering a particularly counter-heavy team could just roll over you and you can't do anything to stop it, but in reality almost every champion is flexible in that at base, they do a non-negligible amount of damage to DPS characters. DPS tend to have around 2000 to 2200 HP, but the lowest DPS a tank can do is about 500, and the lowest DPS of a healer is around 650, on top of stuns or slows as well. So you do have a fighting chance if multiple people are targeting a flank, even if that chance is slim, because while your damage isn't bad against them, their damage is very fucking good against you. The average flank can do about 1100 to 1500 DPS. If they're hitting your tank directly, a single flank can bring them down pretty quickly. But if the tank is doing their tank things and backed up with a team, they can feel immortal. And this is kind of where one of the main draws for this game comes in. Somehow they managed to make this hero shooter feel a bit like a power fantasy. DPS do absolutely incredible damage, so it can feel really good when one guy just pops off. On the other side, a tank can feel nigh unkillable with the support of his team, and depending on which tank, they can hold out for far longer than they have any right to. And most healers can bring people back to full in moments while also supporting the team with extra effects like crowd control and damage. They purposefully made healers obscenely overpowered as well because of a fun mechanic called anti-heal. In Paladins, every shot that hits a champion's HP, not counting shields, it applies a 1.5 second debuff that reduces all healing by a certain percentage. It starts off at 25% at the beginning of the game and scales up as the match goes on all the way to 90% after about 11 minutes for siege matches and sooner for the other game modes. This creates a dynamic where healers generally don't spam heals 24/7 on everyone in direct combat. After 5 minutes, you'll get nowhere really. Instead, healers help apply damage and crowd control effects while trying to weave in healing as soon as people leave combat. This also makes barrier tanks exceptionally valuable since their barrier will allow them to protect the team for long enough for the anti-heal to wear off. This kinda goes hand in hand with team fights, taking no time at all. A DPS can flank behind the tank and remove them pretty quickly, causing the entire team to get wiped out since they can't really heal and have no protection. Alternatively, if the team is able to rally against the DPS, they can make the tank eventually crumble through attrition since they really have no damage to back them up. And while that sounds like stuff that just happens in pretty much every shooter, it happens exponentially faster in Paladins. The moment an important part of your team is gone, you will pretty much die within 10 seconds. Team wipes are practically the norm in this game. So, anti-heal is absolutely kind of a band-aid for healing being so out of whack, but all things considered, I think it's actually fine and kind of works in the context of Paladins being this absolute mess where everything is either 0 or 100 at all times. But on top of anti-heal, there is a way to somewhat deal with how powerful the classes are. There's an in-match item shop that lets you buy various upgrades. These range from ability and utility passives, defensive, healing, and offensive passives. These are less so upgrades to make yourself stronger, but more to make the enemy worse. If the enemy has tons of healing due to barriers, have your DPS grab a wrecker for tons of extra barrier damage to melt the shields in seconds, effectively removing their utility. Having trouble with constant crowd control? Get resilience to make crowd control ults and abilities effectively worthless against you. Having trouble with anti-heal and no shields? Grab rejuvenation so your healers are stronger. Yeah, so a fun fact about increases and reductions in this game, they are additive with each other. So taking max rejuvenate at 90% anti-heal won't make a 1000 heal get reduced to 124, instead it'll go to 440 because it cuts the anti-heal by 24%. You won't be able to eradicate anti-heal because stacking buffs is diminishing returns past 30%, but you're effectively getting 4 times the healing from other healers than other people are mid-combat, which is very powerful, especially if health tanks grab it. The sheer amount of bullshit you're able to survive with it and any other source of increased healing on top of damage reduction is absolutely stupid. There is another part about Paladins that I really like. This game is actually very easy overall. Now, before you raise an eyebrow after hearing me talk about how you can get deleted in seconds by a single DPS, and also that team wipes happen at the blink of an eye, I'm talking about how little this game actually asks of you in order to play it to some degree of competency. Coming from Team Fortress 2, Overwatch, and Rainbow Six Siege as the 3 most recent multiplayer shooters I've played, the difference is night and day. In Team Fortress 2, you have to grasp so many concepts of movement that provide you with a significant advantage. In Overwatch, you dealt with a ton of small character models that could change their direction on a dime, making aiming honestly very irritating. Then there's fucking Siege, which I shouldn't even have to go into the detail of all the pixel perfect corner picking nonsense that goes on in that game. Really, if you know, you know. If you don't, save yourself. In general, all these games are very involved on a mechanical and technical level. Paladins asks almost none of that. Most characters' base move speed is slow. You jump like you got cinder blocks weighing you down. That is, unless you're right up against a wall or an object. You don't even need to learn crouch jumping like in Source games. This game straight up automates that for you, which I really like. And if you even dare think about trying to jump while fighting for any reason, despite the fact that it makes you significantly more predictable, your accuracy tanks so hard for almost every character. Some don't take accuracy hits at all, but that's only because verticality is part of their kit. As a result, Paladins is a surprisingly flat game. Some maps have almost no verticality on top of that, and what verticality there is, it just amounts to a very slight high ground advantage. As a result, every class having a mobility tool is equal parts really nice and kind of annoying. It's because the only way you can really get any speed is from mobility skills. Someone can just fuck off in an instant and you pretty much can't catch them unless you use yours, which might put you in a bad spot once you do try and confirm the kill. This is mostly annoying for tanks and healers since flanks and direct DPS more or less have the damage to delete someone before their neuron can even fire, telling them to hit the get the fuck out of here button. And this also makes any class with a spammable silence or cripple effect unbelievably painful, because if they cripple you at the right moment, you're just dead. Another really nice example of this game making it easier to understand, assuming you notice it, is that enemy outlines will glow red when you're in your effective range. Once they turn orange, it means you'll start to deal less damage, even if it's only 1 less damage. It's admittedly hard to notice in the heat of the moment, but it really helps you understand your effective ranges better. To top it all off, aiming isn't even a strenuous task either. Hitboxes in this game are massive, like really big. They are straight up capsules around the character and not form-fitting dynamic hitboxes. This is admittedly really bad, but considering how loose of a game Paladins is mechanically, I don't really think it's that big of a problem as it could be in any other game. The biggest issue that arises from it is making snipers so much more deadly. They aren't as bad as Widowmaker bullshit instant killing most characters in the game every 1.5 seconds, but they are still quite deadly. And if that wasn't enough already, some characters also have very lenient weapons and abilities. 2 examples spring to mind. Leon is a direct DPS character whose abilities are all just, I shoot my rifle. It's got perfect accuracy, so you'd think she'd be a higher risk, higher reward character, right? No, she is not. Her right mouse button fires a shot that has auto aim on everything in front of her, and her movement skill fires a shot that also has auto aim. You straight up have 800 free damage for anyone because of those skills. With her specifically, you basically cannot miss unless you fire an attack and it homes in on someone you weren't aiming for. Another example is Buck. He has a shotgun, so you have to get really close and make sure your pellets land, right? Also, no. Each pellet does 350 damage, but you can only do a max of 700 per shot. So at close range, all you need is 2 pellets to hit and you will do full damage. The only time aiming is remotely tricky is with headshots, and I'm not sure if it's even that hard, just really jank. It appears to be the only precise thing on a character, but it's also not the most important skill in the world since a lot of champions can't even headshot. So low mobility on top of massive hitboxes that are paired sometimes with auto aim or various easy to use weapons like a shotgun or wide projectiles in general. Yeah, it's very easy to die in this game unless the enemy is like really bad, which to be frank happens sometimes. I choke so often with this shotgun because I'm constantly on edge with how fast you can get removed if 2 DPS notice what you're doing. But that's not to say this game is super basic, just pretty basic. The game focuses more on working with your team very closely to try and not melt to a single person. Proper use of your skills and decent positioning since you really can't just juke an enemy fire constantly and outplay them with movement. Which is to say, this game can get very frustrating. It really can. As I said before, this game is a mess, and while it embraces the mess in ways that actually are quite fun all around, some things are still garbage to deal with even for this dumpster fire. As I said, a single hero can have really high damage, capable of killing your DPS and healers in less than 2 seconds, while also having the ability to escape really well, so you could just be a tank trying to hold off the enemy team when suddenly you died and realized a single flank just took out your entire team. You will absolutely learn to hate some champions with every fiber of your being, mostly flanks because of how hard they are to pin down. My personal favorite kill or annoy on sight characters are Talus and Zhin. Talus is capable of walking up to you, pressing one button to have infinite ammo and 1500 DPS, and then teleport out with no way of knowing where he went. And now we take a break from your regularly scheduled program to enjoy the sweet, soothing sounds of Talus getting fucking deleted. And then there's Zhin, who is also an asshole because he is just so easy to play and has so many escapes. He doesn't do as much damage as other flanks, only a measly 750 DPS roughly, but the projectiles are so big that you basically cannot miss it, so it feels like he does way more. Look at this. It's not okay. He also has a counter that blocks a single hit from basically anything in the game, even stuff other counters can't, while also doing 600 damage immediately after. He also has an ability that boosts his move speed and just becomes immune to damage for 2 seconds, which allows anti-heal to wear off and for him to get fully healed if there's a healer nearby. Then his last ability is also solid mobility. He's just so hard to pin down and so easy to get kills with. There are way more examples, but I'd be here all day if I listed off all the heroes I hate dealing with. Everyone in Paladins is cancer to an extent, but those few heroes are full-blown stage 4 ass cancer. Now, am I shit and need to cry about it? Damn right, and you bet your ass I'll be coping and seething. So now onto the monetization. This game has it all. Skins you can buy with premium currency, loot boxes that house exclusive skins, and other useless crap you can only get from them. A battle pass. You have to buy champions. It's a lot, frankly. This game can honestly be hard to play as a free player. Not because your starting champions are bad, in fact, they're some of the best. Because there's so many champions and they take so long to get. You can get around 200 gold per match, 500 if you complete one of the 3 dailies, and a few thousand from doing the daily queues. There's only 2 heroes in this game that cost 15,000 gold. There's only a bit more than that cost 30,000, which are just the earliest release champs, and the rest are 60,000 gold. In the last 2 weeks of playing this game quite a bit, I amassed enough to buy a single mid-range champion. It's a very slow process. They sort of tried to onboard you a bit by giving you enough money and gems at the start for a few cheap champions, but past that, they do leave you high and dry. If I were to make any suggestion, wait for a sale on this gold edition. It's the oldest bundle with a ton of the early champions, and because of that, it goes on pretty steep sales. I picked it up when it was 67% off, so for $10, I got a whopping 22 champions. Then there's the skin monetization. Holy Christ, on a bicycle is bad. There are a few skins you can buy outright for money, with some being upwards of $15, but the vast majority of them are loot box exclusive, with some pretty garbage odds. The worst part is, only some of the skins are exclusive. It's just full of skins you can buy outright, some of which you can even get for credits. The only upside is that once you own something, you can't get it again, even if they use it as an excuse to absolutely load up the crates with bullshit. And 249 items in this one crate? That's insane, and you only get one item. At the very least, these skins are actually very high quality. Like, holy shit, they put effort into these skins. They look great. Often they change your ability effects, and in quite a few situations they'll straight up change the personality and voice of a character. Buck, for example, goes from a gruff, mildly hypochondriac monk with a shotgun to a bootleg Hulk Hogan voiced by Chris Rager, also known for his roles as Mr. Satan and Mr. Torg.
The cream of the crop. I'm here to ask you one question and one question only. Explosions!
I can see people having an issue with character readability since some ultimate lines might change too much, and skins can even change things like the ability visuals. For example, Fernando's flamethrower on the beach skin turns it into water. But on the other hand, ultimates tend to be accompanied by non-voice line sounds, and you can't switch characters, so you'll always know who you are up against. I can't say I ever had the problem with who the fuck is that, because I knew what people would use and look like going in. The only instance of characters confusing me was with the corrupted Io skin compared to Vora's base skin. But one of them floats with a giant scythe, and the other is 3 foot tall and walks on the ground. It's kinda hard to get them mixed up still. That said, holy fuck, this game is insanely thirsty. It reminded me of how porn-centric the 2015s were with hero shooters. Overwatch had a massive boom of Rule 34 that they tried to stomp out. Battleborn was accused of maybe secretly making their own Rule 34 in order to draw attention to the game, all while Paladins kinda just sat there and decided to not denounce or hide it. Paladins is the horny jail. Every character has at least one of either a skin that makes them into a furry, a skin that makes them incredibly lewd, if they weren't already that is, or a gender-bent skin. Almost always making male characters female. Oh, and don't worry, almost everyone has a massive rack. There's definitely a fair few modest characters, but they're absolutely outclassed massively, and they will almost always have a big titty GF skin. That's not to say that men don't have their fair share. I mean, look at this fucking Fernando skin. Man's packing more heat than his fucking flamethrower. And all this is to say, it goes so far into fan service territory that I actually like it. Like, I love it. It's gone so far past the line of showing any real decency that I've come around to absolutely respect it. It's stupid, it's gratuitous, and it makes no effort to make you think it's not. because while it also provides you with so much horny bait, they make some absolute masterclass skins that other games would be afraid of making because it changes things too much, like these Gundam skins or the bootleg Darksiders Armored Angel skins. Holy fuck, these look so cool. It's a shame that some of them will cost me literally hundreds of dollars, probably. My favorite part about all this is that the characters' breasts bounce. Now, before you give me that side-eye look I can feel right now, the reason it's my favorite is because this game does not have body physics. All cloth and body physics are actually hand-animated. Every last chest movement on the character was uniquely made for its animation. Emotes, character selections, walking, riding on horseback, all lovingly crafted. Imagine going all the way through animation school, graduating only to find yourself animating the chest movements of a 2 billion-year-old stacked as hell lolly. Like, this game goes so far into fan service, I'm kind of upset it doesn't exist for the men either. Thankfully, one of the devs also thinks the same. But going back to the monetization, there's also a battle pass. There really isn't much to say other than I think it's kinda lame. It's full of random fluff like player avatars and sprays. The 2 loot boxes have either hundreds of possible items, or just a box that only contains recolors of base skins, or the base skins wearing silly hats. You also only get 50 gems, which is 1/8 of the gem cost back for your effort. The big ticket items are 4 skins and enough gold to buy almost 1 new champion. Problem is, 2 of the skins are recolors of the same skin in the pass, and one of those skins is even free. Apparently, you can earn the pass yourself for free. It just takes a really long time and comes with a pretty big but. Trials of the Realm is a series of challenges you can complete without directly paying for them, and you get a bunch of rewards. Supposedly, all the gems you get from the trials, on top of the gems you get from the Battle Pass, is enough to cover the total cost of the Battle Pass. The stipulation is that you basically need to have most champions unlocked in order to do this. Every area has 3 sets of challenges. Each set has half of the challenges requiring a single champion to be played. If you don't have them, your progress is halted. You can't even wait for them to go on free rotation because one of the early challenges requires the newest hero who has only been out for a month at this point, so there's no way they'll be going on rotation. It's also time-gated where new areas unlock after several days of waiting. Pretty much any source of free gems just takes so incredibly long, which, to be fair, is understandable, but on top of how painful the monetization in this game is, it doesn't exactly feel good at all on the player side. And the only other problem I really have with this game is how it can be really buggy sometimes. For the most part, things will go off without a hitch, but every now and then, you'll play matches where your character's sounds fail to load in. Another rare bug is where enemies' sounds fail to load in, which is pretty fucking awful if it's a stealth-based flank, which I have had happen. You might get stuck on a black screen after a match ends, which requires you to restart the game, and whatever this is. I've also had 1 or 2 crashes in the few weeks I've played this game. It seems mildly regular, considering once every 5 or so games you'll just have someone disconnect, but I can never really tell if it's a rage quit or a crash because sometimes when you crash you just can't rejoin the game. Probably the biggest issue I've had is just getting the game to run the first time. Everyone I've talked to has had some issue with getting it to start. One friend says this game crashes 3 times in a row before opening. Every time. Another kept crashing until he changed his Windows desktop resolution, launched the game, and then changed it back because otherwise the game thought he was running it in a virtual machine. But me? I had one of the weirdest possible issues. And I am not exaggerating here. It's been a long time, so the details are a bit fuzzy, but I legit could not download the correct version of this game. I downloaded it off Steam, fresh install on this hard drive, and it says I'm running an outdated version. Verify the files, nothing. I tried to get it off the high-res launcher instead, but it didn't exist anymore by that point. I ended up installing it on Epic to only have the same issue, so I did some research. Someone said to use the high-res support program, which was also outdated and trying to connect to outdated servers. A bunch more digging, and someone linked to a very deeply obscure high-res page that actually looked kinda sketchy as fuck because it wasn't updated to any new designs, and it had a download link to an up-to-date support tool. I ran it, and it actually fucking worked. Not for the Steam release, no, only the Epic version. You have no idea how utterly confused I was. And the best part is, I spent longer fixing Paladins than I did playing it, because back then, I played it for like half a day and then uninstalled it again. So that's Paladins. I'm having a really fun time with it, even between all the absolute stomps on both sides that happen sometimes. It's a great game to just take mildly seriously, since all you need to know in order to not be horrible is how to vaguely aim, where not to stand, and how to use your abilities. It's full of so much fun and cheesy charm that despite its many issues, I really can't be too mad at it. The monetization still fucking sucks though.